Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into the fascinating, incredibly rigorous world of Isizy Ben Yehuda's logical derivations. We are going to meticulously map out the strict prohibitions surrounding meat and milk. Now, we aren't just looking at what the final law is, we're going to see exactly how it's constructed from the ground up, using some seriously intense textual and logical proofs. It's like watching a master architect build a skyscraper, but with legal theory. Let's dive in. Here is our roadmap for this derivation. First, the dual prohibition. Second, the torn animal analogy. Third, testing a fortiori inferences. Fourth, searching for common elements. Fifth, the diverse kinds precedent. And finally, number 6, practical dinner table applications. All right, let's start with section 1, the dual prohibition. To really understand this, we have to establish the basic premise of the Torah law in question. It's actually a combination of two completely distinct limitations. You see, the ban on physically eating the food is a totally separate legal mechanism from the ban on deriving any economic benefit from it. The original text doesn't explicitly spell out both bans in one neat little sentence. So to prove this is a severe Torah law and not just a later rabbinic decree, legal scholars have a massive task. They have to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that you can't not eat it, and, entirely separately, that you cannot derive any benefit from it. They are two very distinct hurdles we have to clear today. Moving right along to section 2, the torn animal analogy. Okay, so let's tackle that first hurdle, consumption. How do we solidly prove eating it is a Torah-level ban? The text anchors itself in a really powerful verbal analogy. If you look at Deuteronomy regarding meat and milk, it says, "For you are a sacred people." Now hold that thought and look at Exodus, which talks about the flesh of a torn animal found in the field. It says, "And you shall be sacred men." Because the Torah uses this specific word, sacred, in both places, it legally binds the two concepts together. It directly transfers the unquestioned ban on eating a torn animal right over to the eating of meat cooked in milk. Boom, half the puzzle is solved. We know for sure we can't eat it. Which brings us to section 3, testing a fortiori inferences. Now for the really tricky part. We have to figure out how to prove that deriving benefit is also forbidden. To do this, the analysts deploy an a fortiori inference. These inferences are basically the mechanical gears of this entire legal argument. They allow us to extrapolate new rules from existing precedents. Think of it like a VIP club. If the bouncer won't even let you into the lobby, they certainly aren't going to let you into the VIP room, right? If a lesser, lighter case has a strict restriction, the greater, heavier case must absolutely share it. So the scholars need a precedent to start with, and they attempt to use the law regarding the fruit of a tree during its first 3 years. That fruit is strictly forbidden for any benefit. Now, think about this. Planting a tree isn't a sin. It's a completely neutral, permitted act. Yet the resulting fruit is banned for benefit. On the flip side, actively cooking meat and milk together is an explicit sin. So the logic flows beautifully. If the fruit of the first 3 years is forbidden for benefit, even though no sin was committed in creating it, surely meat and milk, which actually involved an active sin to cook, should also be forbidden for benefit. Honestly, it seems like a perfect logical proof. But hold on a second, this is where the relentless iterative stress testing begins. We have to actively try to find a variable that breaks our own logical equation. In this legal framework, if the baseline case, the fruit, has a unique strictness that meat and milk lack, the whole comparison falls apart. And unfortunately for our neat little theory, a unique stringency is found. The inference is completely shattered because the fruit of the first 3 years was never permitted. From the absolute moment it budded on that branch, it was legally restricted. It literally never had a time when it was fit for use. Meat and milk, however, they were perfectly legal independent items before you went and cooked them together. Because the fruit has this inherent unique strictness from birth, so to speak, we can't use it to prove the rule for meat and milk. The proof is flat out rejected. Okay, scratch that. Time to pivot. The analysts test a brand new precedent, leavened bread on Passover. They use this because it successfully passes the was it ever fit test. Leavened bread is heavily banned for benefit during Passover, sure. But the day before Passover, it was perfectly fine to eat and sell. It definitely had a time when it was fit. So the scholars suggest using leavened bread to build our a fortiori inference. But, you guessed it, this second test fails too. Why? Well, because eating leavened bread on Passover carries the unique, heavy severity of spiritual excision. That is a severe divine punishment. Cooking or eating meat and milk simply does not carry that specific extreme penalty. Once again, our baseline case has a unique stringency that our target case lacks, so the logical bridge collapses into the river. We are right back to square one. Let's push forward into section 4, searching for common elements. So if one precedent alone isn't strong enough to bear the weight of the proof, what if we use two? Imagine building a legal matrix. The scholars attempt to cancel out the unique stringencies of the fruit and the bread to establish a solid common baseline rule. They argue it like this. Look, the fruit was never fit, but the bread was. The bread carries spiritual excision, but the fruit doesn't. Each case lacks the unique strictness of the other. But what do they share? Both are firmly prohibited for consumption and benefit. Therefore, we should be able to deduce from their shared common element that meat and milk are also prohibited for benefit. Just when it feels like we've cracked the code, a sharp counter-argument drops that completely derails this combined logic. It points out a fatal flaw shared by both precedents. The analysts ask, wait, is there a unique stringency shared by both the fruit and the bread that meat and milk do not share? Yep, there absolutely is. A highly specific agricultural variable breaks the analogy, proving that you simply cannot directly map rules from crops onto animal products. Both the fruit of the first 3 years and the leavened bread originate from the ground. Meat and milk come from animals. Now, to you and me, this might seem like a minor technicality, but in this hyper-rigid logical system, it's a massive structural difference. The combined derivation fails. We still haven't proven that meat and milk are prohibited for benefit. All right, let's look at Section 5. The diverse kinds precedent. We are so close, but we need a precedent that doesn't grow exclusively from the ground, or we need a third precedent to add to our matrix to cancel out that pesky grows from the ground variable. So the text introduces case number 3, the prohibition against planting diverse kinds of seeds in a vineyard. This case fits perfectly into our matrix because it is not punishable by spiritual excision. But much more importantly, when we add it to the mix alongside the fruit and the bread, it helps form an airtight inference. But wait, we have to be absolutely rigorous here. We can't just accept it. The text challenges this final precedent with the exact same test that disqualified the fruit of the first 3 years way back at the beginning. Did the diverse kinds of seeds in a vineyard ever have a time when they were fit, or were they legally prohibited from the very start? If they were always prohibited, they have a unique stringency, and our grand finale proof fails. But guess what? The logic holds incredibly strong. Because the seeds and saplings were perfectly fine, totally legal seeds, before someone carried them into the vineyard and they took root, they indeed had a time when they were fit. The prohibition only triggers the moment they take root and start growing together. This completely validates the precedent. By combining the rules of the fruit, the bread, and the diverse kinds in a vineyard, the legal scholars finally create a flawless, undeniable logical proof that meat cooked in milk is strictly prohibited for benefit under Torah law. Which brings us to our final stop, Section 6, Practical Dinner Table Applications. So what's the actual so what here? Why does this exhaustive, matrix-level logical deduction matter to the average person? Because it directly dictates what you can serve at dinner and what you must do with a mistakenly cooked batch of food. Because it's now firmly established as a severe Torah law through this exact process, if someone accidentally cooks a beef meatball in a dairy sauce, it is entirely restricted. You obviously cannot eat it. But because of this successful a fortiori inference regarding benefit, you also can't feed it to your dog, and you definitely cannot sell it to a non-Jewish neighbor to recoup your financial loss. It has to be completely disposed of. I want to leave you with this final thought. To truly understand a law, you have to be willing to vigorously test every single block of its foundation. Isizy Ben Yehuda and his peers didn't just casually accept a rule handed down to them. They demanded that it survive the most grueling, logical cross-examination imaginable. It kind of makes you wonder about the rules and assumptions we operate under every single day, and whether they could withstand this same brilliant, relentless scrutiny. Thanks so much for hanging out with me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.